They said it like it was nothing. Effective immediately. 2 words. Crisp and final. I had spent 15 years building relationships, solving problems, and navigating crises for Westbridge Biotech. Now one-on-ones. In less than a minute, my job was gone. My name is Graham Whitaker. I'm 53 years old. And until this morning, I was Director of Strategic Client Relations. I had been with Westbridge since its early expansion days, when the company was still finding its place in the competitive landscape of Canadian biotech. I wasn't the loudest in the room or the one with the flashiest credentials, but I had something that most newcomers didn't experience, and history. I knew every major account by name, every handshake that sealed a deal, and every red flag that could send a client walking. That's what kept us growing when others folded. That's what kept me grounded all these years. So when Clara Monroe, our newly appointed VP of Operations, announced my departure during a full staff meeting, I kept my expression still. No outburst, no panic, just a quiet nod. I looked around at the team I had mentored, the same people I had helped hire, coach, and promote. Most of them avoided eye contact. Some shifted in their seats. A few stared down at their notepads like the words printed there suddenly mattered more than I did. Clara stood at the head of the table, polished and self-assured. She was 36, a rising star with a graduate degree in organizational change and a track record in lean restructuring. I'd seen her type before. She believed numbers told the full story. In her view, relationships were soft metrics hard to measure and even harder to justify when budget reviews came around. Graham, if there's anything you'd like to add, she asked, as if she were offering me a moment of closure. I gave her a faint smile. Just that I hope the Holloway presentation goes well on Friday. That made her pause. For a second, the room felt frozen. Clara didn't understand the weight of that account or what it had taken to get Holloway Pharmaceuticals to trust us after their last vendor had failed them. But I did. I'd been nurturing that deal for over 8 months, tailoring every interaction to their precise expectations. And now, Clara thought she could carry it through on a spreadsheet and a slide deck. I walked out without looking back. No box of things. No goodbyes, just the quiet knowledge that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I knew the real consequences of her decision wouldn't show up until Friday morning. When the client asked a question, only I knew how to answer. I packed my life into 2 cardboard boxes that afternoon. Not just files and coffee mugs, but 23 years of decisions, wins, late-night calls, and the kind of relationships you can't explain in bullet points. The office felt colder than usual. Or maybe that was just me noticing what I'd always ignored: the silence when loyalty is no longer convenient. Each item I touched brought back something. The blue notebook from our first project with Ontario's Ministry of Health, a framed photo from the Montreal team retreat, a scuffed folder labeled Holloway Internal Only. I held on to that one a little longer. Holloway Pharmaceuticals wasn't just another client. They were the kind of account you build a legacy on. Based in Calgary, small in size but massive in influence, Holloway was pioneering precision biosensors for real-time immunotherapy tracking. They didn't buy vendors, they invested in partnerships. That's why it took me months to even get them to agree to a first meeting. And when they did, it was face-to-face. No slides, no buzzwords, just me and their CTO discussing failure rates and ethical data use over black coffee. Clara never understood that. She looked at Holloway and saw dollar signs. I saw trust build over time. She thought success was in the pitch deck. But Holloway wasn't impressed by branding or projections. They wanted fluency in their science, their ethics, their long-term mission. I gave them that. The office door creaked open. Beth peeked in. Her voice was quiet. This doesn't feel right. I'm still breathing. That's something, I said, taping the second box shut. You carried this place through 3 restructurings. Everyone knows that. Maybe not everyone. She nodded slowly, pressing her lips together to hold back more. We both knew this wasn't about performance. It never was. When she left, I took one more glance around. My chair, the coat rack, the dent in the cabinet from the time I dropped a prototype unit during testing, all still and waiting, like they hadn't realized I wouldn't return. Then Clara appeared in the doorway. She stood stiffly, arms folded. Graham, about Holloway. Not my problem anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look up. But I said it clearly enough for her to understand. She hesitated, like she wanted to explain something, maybe even apologize, but I offered nothing. I'd given her every chance to understand. She'd chosen not to take them. She left. As I carried the boxes past the marketing pod in the server room, no one met my eyes. That was fine. Dignity doesn't ask to be noticed. She thought she'd fired me. What she really did was sever the last living thread that held her future together. The house was still when I walked in, the kind of quiet that clung to the walls. I set the 2 boxes near the coat rack and slipped off my shoes. This wasn't just any evening. This was the first one in 23 years that I came home without a job at Norwin Biotech. Helen, Ridiriuum, my wife of over 20 years, met me in the kitchen. She didn't say anything right away. She just poured 2 mugs of coffee, added sugar to mine like always, and slid it across the counter. That's the kind of partner she was. She didn't need explanations, she just knew. "You're early," she finally said. "They made it official." I replied. No farewell speech, just a memo in silence. She didn't look surprised. How bad? I gave her a half smile. Could have been worse. Could have cried in front of the intern. We sat in that familiar silence again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like space clearing itself for something new. I carried my laptop to the dining table, sat down, and opened a folder I'd labeled Contingencies. I'd been updating it quietly over the past year, not because I was paranoid, but because I was realistic. Inside were notes that never made it to Norwin's central servers. Holloway Pharmaceuticals, our biggest potential contract, had a client profile 6 pages long, typed and annotated in my own system, not just their specs or business model. Personal QS, preferences, warnings, like how their CTO refused vendor calls after 5 in the afternoon, or how their procurement lead once blacklisted a supplier for being 5 minutes late to a pitch. Those details didn't live on Norwin's SharePoint. They lived here, in my files, and in my memory. I opened LinkedIn out of habit. 4 new messages. One from Diane at Driftwell Analytics. Another from a recruiter I barely knew at Altruist Biogen. By the time I finished scrolling, I had 3 interview invites waiting, and a 4th saying, "Urgent interest, are you free tomorrow?" Helen glanced at the screen. "Looks like you won't be unemployed for long. In biotech, no one stays on the bench for long," I said, sipping coffee. Not if they've actually built something that lasts. I opened the draft resume I'd been quietly updating for months. I'd removed Norwin's name, but kept the achievements that mattered. Merger relationship growth, client retention, crisis recovery. None of it flashy, but all of it real. Helen walked past me, resting a hand briefly on my shoulder before heading upstairs. She didn't have to say anything. That's the thing about real partnership. It knows when to speak. And when to let the quiet do the talking. I leaned back, watching the cursor blink, somewhere between the boxes at the door and the emails lining up. I realized something had shifted. I didn't sabotage Norwin. I just stopped saving it. At precisely 8 noon, first warning, 35 in the morning. Inside Norwin Biotech's West Wing conference room, Clara stood stiffly before the screen, attempting to walk the Holloway Pharmaceuticals team through the presentation. From what Beth described later, the room was like ice. No one interrupted, but no one smiled either. Holloway's CTO, Dr. Vincent Ung, was known for his sharp mind and sharper expectations. He had flown in from Toronto for this pitch. Next to him sat Mariana Fielding, their procurement director, a woman who could spot bluffing before the first syllable dropped. Clara clicked through the first few slides, branding, mission statement, market positioning, polished, but empty. She paused too long on one of the graphs. That's when Dr. leaned forward, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Where's the sensor latency projection? The datagram promised us." Clara blinked. "It should be. Let me check. There's a summary later in the appendix." No. Not a summary, Mariana said. Cool and clear. We requested a full technical validation model with 3 deployment scenarios. Clara's fingers hovered over the laptop. "I believe all core materials are on the drive." Beth told me her voice wavered on the word believe. She started digging through folders, scanning fill names, searching desperately for something that had never been digitized. She opened a document labeled Trillium Marsh Spec Overview, hoping for salvation, but it was just a 2-page visual brief. No calibration specs, no regulatory path, no cost-benefit structure, nothing that answered real questions. Silence stretched uncomfortably. Doctor turned to Mariana. Didn't Graham mention a latency threshold benchmark under 4 milliseconds for batch 3? He did. Mariana nodded. And a unique failover protocol for long-term installations. This doesn't cover it. Clara flushed. Stammered something about following up later. But the shift had happened. Holloway had seen through the surface. From my kitchen, I stared at my phone. Beth's messages came in like clockwork. They're not impressed. Clara looks like she's drowning. Helen sat across from me, sipping her tea. She didn't ask for updates. She didn't have to. My eyes gave it away. Beth again. Mariana just said, this feels like a brochure. Oh, not a proposal. I typed. She's not wrong. Clara had never understood. This wasn't about colors on slides. It was about trust. It was about months of precise technical discovery, of knowing exactly how Holloway made decisions, what they valued, what they feared. She thought she could replace that with polished decks and borrowed lingo. She couldn't. I closed the message thread and stood. This was it. The first crack in the wall. I was ready for this war, and silence would be my weapon. At exactly 9. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Beth. It was a number I didn't recognize. Area code Ottawa. I let it ring out, then checked the voicemail. Gratpum. Graham. This is Mariana Fielding from Holloway Pharmaceuticals. I understand you're no longer with Norwin, but if you're available for a brief consult, I stopped the playback. She hadn't even waited for Clara to explain. That said more than anything else. 10 minutes later, Beth texted. They're packing up. No handshake. No follow-up meeting scheduled. Just leaving. I didn't reply right away. Helen stood at the sink, rinsing out coffee mugs. Was that them? She asked. I nodded. They're walking already. Her brow furrowed. That fast. Once Holloway spots uncertainty, they don't hesitate. They trust data, not charisma. From what Beth later told me, Clara followed them halfway to the elevator, clutching a printout she hoped would change their minds. But Mariana had simply said, this isn't what we were promised, and stepped inside the elevator without looking back. By 10. Thirsty, Marcus called me. His voice was calm, measured too calm. Graham, we'd like to clarify some things about the Holloway presentation. Clara may have, well, she wasn't fully briefed. I stared out the window, watching a squirrel dart across the backyard fence. Not my responsibility. Marcus, I was dismissed. Sure, but this doesn't have to be permanent. We could explore a consulting arrangement short term. Of course, just to salvage the Holloway account. You already had me in that role. Marcus, it was called employment. He exhaled. They're asking for you. I'm not available, so Mabrin. He hesitated. What would make you available? You're asking the wrong question. He went quiet. Then, as if reading from a prepared script. You know, this could have consequences for the entire company. That's not on me. I ended the call and let the silence settle. Not triumphant, not cruel, just final. This was never about revenge. It was about boundaries, about letting the weight of someone else's choice fall squarely where it belonged. Clara hadn't fired a liability. She'd erased her only bridge to a $30 million deal. The call came just after 8 p. And unexpected and unwelcomed. I let it ring twice before answering. You have to help me, Clara said. Her voice was tight, brittle like glass under pressure. I paused, choosing silence over sympathy. She continued without waiting. They're blaming me for Holloway. Marcus is panicking. The board is circling. But they're saying you withheld materials. You sabotaged the handoff. There it was. Not a plea. A setup. I offered to transition the accounts. I replied. You declined, Orn. Repeatedly, I never got a full walkthrough. She snapped. There were gaps. Important files missing. You mean the ones that existed in notebooks, prototypes, and relationships. Silence. Then she switched tones softer, more calculating. Graham. This could take us both down. If the board thinks this was internal sabotage, you mean if they believe the story you're crafting? A long pause. Then I didn't want it to be like this, but it already was. An hour later, I got a text from Sophie. one of Norwin's project analysts. We hadn't spoken much since the fallout, but her message was sharp. You need to know something. Can we talk? We met at a late-night diner downtown. She wasn't alone, Eric. A quiet systems architect came with her. We overheard something during a review meeting. Sophie began. 2 weeks ago, Clara asked IT to check your audio logs. Claimed you made verbal threats in a private call with her. Eric nodded. She tried to spin it like you were planning to tank the Holloway deal out of spite. I raised an eyebrow. And the audio was reviewed by compliance. It was clean. You were measured. Professional. No trace of what she claimed. She tried again. Sophie added. Pulled snippets out of context. Sent them to Marcus. But compliance flagged the edit. It was doctored. So that was her last move, fabricate sabotage when none existed. And it backfired. She doesn't know we're telling you this, Eric said. But enough is enough. I leaned back in the booth, the fluorescent lights flickering above us. Clara hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated everyone else's tolerance for lies. I looked at them both. Yahern. Capable. Caught in a war they didn't ask for. Thank you, I said quietly. For your honesty, Sophie nodded. People are done covering for her. Eric checked his phone. Word is the board's calling a closed session Monday morning. Clara doesn't even know yet. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Monday, I said, more to myself than them. She's not just out of moves. She's out of time. Monday morning arrived without Clara. No messages. No calendar blocks. No forwarded calls. Beth texted me at 8 it's Geo 14 foot. Clara's office is empty. No nameplate. No memo. She's just gone. In corporate culture, a quiet exit is rarely graceful. It's often a surrender. I closed the message and turned to my own new setting. Drift Shade Analytics, nestled inside a glass-fronted complex in Burnaby, was a far cry from Norwin's dull gray towers. The walls were lined with design sketches, data projections, and something rarer energy. Jas Dillon, the founder and CEO, was waiting in the boardroom when I arrived. Late 40s, was Frontorn, sharp but warm, with the kind of calm authority that didn't need volume to command respect. We'd first spoken over Zoom a week earlier. Unlike Clara, Jas didn't care about image. He cared about insight. He stood as I entered. Graham Sarunorn, Ernie, Rame. The team's excited. I won't waste time. This is the final draft. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a formal offer, 30% above Norwin's best, flexible structure, full authority to recruit and manage my own team. Still no references. I asked. He chuckled. We already did our homework. Holloway called you the quiet mind behind the numbers. Okay, son. That's good enough for me. I signed before the coffee cooled. A few hours later, Marcus left a voicemail. Hey, Reyes and Graham, we'd like to discuss your possible return. The board is open to restructuring your role with full oversight. I think we've both had time to reflect. I didn't call back. Instead, I met Beth and Sophie at a small coffee shop near Waterfront Station Neutral Ground, with good lighting and no echoes of the past. Beth looked worn, but lighter. Sorry. Sophie had that same determined fire I'd seen growing in her. She slid an envelope across the table. My resignation letter. I raised an eyebrow. I'm done. No wonder the fun, sir. Sir, she said simply. Clara was the face. Went to Turin, but she terminal. But the rot runs deeper. Meetings that mean nothing. Politics over progress. I want out before I become numb to it. Beth sipped her tea. It's starting quietly, but it's starting. Clara's exit was the crack. You were the first stone out of the wall. I looked at Sophie's folded envelope, then at the Drift Shade badge in my pocket. I'd signed on to start something new, but maybe it was more than a job. Maybe it was a signal. Sophie stood up. Don't worry, I'm not the only one walking. And I knew then this wasn't the end of a company. It was the beginning of an exodus. We're not poaching anyone, Jas said with a quiet smile. We're just lowering a lifeboat. It was the kind of line that lingered long after the meeting ended. Within a week of signing on, I had 3 new resumes on my desk. All of them from Norwin. None of them surprised me. Sophie came first, then Eric, then a data engineer named Maya, whom I'd never worked with directly, but who arrived with a sharp portfolio and sharper instincts. We didn't advertise for these roles. We didn't have to. Word spreads fast when people are starving for something different, something real. By Thursday, we had secured Holloway's first pilot contract. Smaller in scope, yes, but direct. No middle layers. No project managers twisting outcomes to fit narratives. Just science. Just results. Surikanir Masonormin Watts. The real moment, though, came that Friday morning. I walked into our small glass conference room at Driftshade to find them all already seated. Sophie scribbling notes, Eric with his laptop open, Maya sketching diagrams on the whiteboard. There was no tension, no formalities, just quiet energy. I cleared my throat. They looked up. I'm not here to run a ship. I'm here to build one with you. Eric nodded. We're tired of patching holes in someone else's sinking boat. Sophie added, this isn't about titles anymore. It's about doing things right. I sat down, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Not the naive kind, the tested kind, the kind forged after loss, after betrayal, after waking up from years of coasting in the name of loyalty. This team wasn't built from LinkedIn searches or HR funnels. It was born out of a shared exhaustion with dysfunction and a shared hunger for meaning. That afternoon, Holloway's technical lead joined us over Zoom. Mariana looked relaxed, even upbeat. We're optimistic. There's solid mage team, she said. Norwin no longer fits our model. You do? I thanked her, meaning it. After the call, I lingered in the meeting room. The others filtered out, talking quietly about timeline adjustments and onboarding. The glass door clicked shut behind them. I opened my laptop, preparing to follow up with finance. Then I saw it. A new email. The sender, Hamor, Clara Whitman. No subject line, just her name. And after everything, I hesitated to open it. But I did. The email wasn't long. No subject line, no formal greeting, just a message, sent at 7 GIO 46 FUD in the evening. 4 paragraphs, Surashiminowasun, written with unusual restraint. It began simply, I understand now. Not, I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just that, an admission stripped bare. Clara Whitman, once so obsessed with image, had finally dropped the mirror. She wrote that inheriting my title was never about merit. It was about lineage, optics, legacy. Being the niece of Norrin's founder came with unspoken pressure. She had grown up watching powerful people dominate meetings through silence, not presence. She thought success meant asserting control, cutting cleanly, leaving no doubt. And so, when she stepped into my role, she didn't just want the authority. I think she wanted to erase the shadow I left behind. My systems, my protocols, even my quiet relationships, all seen as relics of a version of Norwin she didn't believe in. She wrote, I thought if I acted like I deserved the room, people would stop questioning why I was in it. She didn't name her actions, not the manipulated audit logs, not the refusal to transition Holloway properly, not the attempted character assassination through fabricated recordings. But she did say this. I know now that I burned things I didn't build. That sentence stayed with me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. That would have been easier. In a way, easier to dismiss, to react to weigh, but she didn't frame her note around me. She framed it around herself, around the version of Clara she now saw clearly, maybe for the first time. She said she was leaving Norwin not on a sabbatical, not for another board seat, leaving the industry entirely. I don't belong in rooms where the stakes are trust. I read the email twice. Then a third time. I kept waiting for something to rise in me: anger, vindication, relief, something to break through. Instead, I felt, still, months ago, I would have obsessed over this, forwarded it to a mentor, parsed every phrase, wondered if it was a trap, a PR stunt, a pivot, debated whether to respond, to correct, to confront. But none of that surfaced now, because I knew she wasn't writing to me. She was writing to herself. That was the real admission, not just of guilt, but of understanding, of finally seeing the cost of control, of performance, Demif 101, of hollow leadership, and realizing it wasn't worth it. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Her words weren't a request for closure. They were a confession without a listener. And I had no interest in becoming her confessor. I archived the message. Then I leaned back in my chair, let my eyes rest on the soft city lights flickering through the window. I thought about the past year, about drift and loyalty and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave something you once fought to stay in. That night, I didn't check my email again. I didn't lie awake replaying decisions. I didn't rehearse conversations that would never happen. I turned off my lamp, lay down, and let the quiet wrap around me. And for the first time in many months, I slept through the night. Dad, your story is in my textbook. I nearly dropped my coffee. My daughter's voice buzzed through the Bluetooth speaker in my car as I pulled into the parking lot outside Driftshade. She was in her second year of business school at UBC, and though we'd always stayed close, our conversations usually revolved around course loads, part-time jobs, and which profs gave too much homework. But this morning felt different. They call it the Norwin disruption. Aaron, she said. It's in the chapter about ethical leadership. You're in a sidebar. There's even a quote from one of your former colleagues about how you handled the transition, quiet resilience. They called it 1 to 10. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to correct the record, tell her it wasn't that clean, that I'd wrestled with doubt and fury and the urge to retaliate in ways far louder than I ever did. But another part of me, a quieter part, was proud. After I parked, I walked into the office. It's when Mia ran past the glass meeting rooms and soft clatter of keys. Maya waved from the whiteboard. Sophie was sketching a new workflow diagram. Eric was laughing about something with Beth near the kitchenette. This was our new rhythm now. Later that afternoon, Helen came by. She brought homemade scones and a printout of an article from a leadership magazine. The headline read, "When Retaliation Looks Like Restraint, the Case of Norwin Biotech." She raised an eyebrow as she handed it to me. "You're officially boring enough to be academic." I laughed. Helen had been my anchor during those weeks after I left Norwin. My wife, yes, but also a partner who never asked me to justify my silence. She knew it was my way of cutting deeper than words ever could. We sat in my small office with coffee and quiet. She studied the article again. They missed the best part. "What's that, Denaboro?" Or, "You didn't just survive. You taught them a lesson." I let that land. Because she was right. I hadn't just weathered a betrayal. I'd redefined my worth on my own terms. I didn't burn bridges, I outgrew them. I didn't destroy Norwin. I withdrew my support and let the cracks widen on their own. And somewhere along the line, others saw that one he now shown, followed it, chose better for themselves. Legacy is a strange thing. You think it's about titles, plaki, buildings with your name on them. But maybe it's just how people remember what you stood for, especially when no one was watching. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed a little longer. I walked past the server room, past the hallway of whiteboards filled with half-solved problems and big ideas. I looked at the photo on the bulletin board, our new team on day one, wide-eyed but ready. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from my daughter again. She'd attached a picture of the textbook page. And there it was, my name, my role, my quote, no exaggeration, no drama, just a brief account of how I didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't break. I just walked away. And somehow, that walk shook the building more than any outburst could have. I powered down my monitor, turned off the lights, and thought, maybe for the first time, sometimes the loudest legacy is letting silence speak for itself. There was a time I believed silence meant surrender. That walking away without making a scene meant admitting defeat. That letting go was the same as giving up. But if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that silence, when chosen with intention, can be the sharpest blade. What happened at Norwin wasn't an isolated event. It's just one chapter in a much larger book, a story among countless office stories where good people give their all, only to be cast aside. People who train their replacements, people who build systems that others exploit, people who do the right thing quietly and get punished loudly. If you're watching this and feel like you're in that very place, overlooked, misunderstood, maybe even betrayed, I want you to know, you're not alone. The story you just heard may be mine, but the emotions behind it, they belong to many. They may even belong to you. And I also want you to know this. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it moves slow, but it does move. With patience, and with clarity, and yes, with the grace of God. I won't pretend it was easy. I had nights I couldn't sleep. Days I questioned every choice. Moments I wanted to fight back in ways that wouldn't have served anyone, including myself. But something deeper held me. A quiet certainty that I was seen even when the world turned its back. I believe that was God's hand. I believe He walked with me through those empty halls, through that silence, through that resignation letter I never thought I'd write. You see, we all carry wounds from our workplaces, emotional bruises that don't show up in HR reports. But what defines us is not what they take away. It's what we do after. And sometimes, one of her charms, the most powerful move is not revenge. It's renewal. This story isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been told they're replaceable. Everyone who's been called too quiet, too old, too ethical, or too slow. And yet, they were the ones holding everything together. It's about office stories that don't make the headlines, but live in whispers and glances, in closed-door meetings, in Friday afternoon firings. And it's about rewriting those stories with integrity, intelligence, ferocity, and dignity. What I've learned is simple, but not easy to practice. Patience is stronger than pride. Stillness can be louder than shouting. And those who wait on God don't wait in vain. Because when you trust in something greater than yourself, when you hand over the fight to the one who sees all, the outcome may not be immediate. But it will be just. I didn't win with fury. I didn't win by tearing others down. I won by holding the line, by walking away with my values intact. And I believe, truly, that's the legacy that matters. My daughter once said, "Deterwan, your story is in my textbook." But what she doesn't know is that the real textbook, the one that shaped me, wasn't bound in paper. It was written in scripture, in late-night prayers, in moments when all I had left was faith. So if you're still in the middle of your own story, I offer you this. Don't rush to shout. Don't scramble to prove. Just pause. Refund to your breathing and ask yourself, what would strength look like if no one else could see it? And then let God do the rest. To everyone who stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Thank you for giving your time to listen. Thank you for valuing stories like mine and like yours. Because these office stories matter, they aren't just on an entertainment. They're reminders that character counts, that truth eventually speaks, and that we, as a community, grow stronger when we share not just our victories, but our scars. If this story resonated with you, leave a 1 in the comments below. Let me know you're here, that you're someone who still believes quiet strength matters. And if you've been through something similar, feel free to share your story too. You never know who it might help. And of course, if you want to hear more real-life office stories of dignity, betrayal, or redemption, and smart, satisfying comebacks, please subscribe to this channel. Let's build a space where we honor what matters, not just results, but how we achieve them, not just who wins, but how they carry themselves along the way. Because in the end, as I've come to learn, sometimes the loudest legacy is letting silence speak for itself.